My name is Evelina, and I was once the wife of Chancellor Augustus, one of the most respected men in our realm. The day my husband signed the divorce decree, I left the Chancellor's estate alone, carrying nothing but the memories of 8 years that had slowly turned to ash in my heart. Everyone knew that Chancellor Augustus was a man of unwavering principles, cold and incorruptible in his duties. Yet for the sake of one woman, a criminal's daughter named Valentina, he would argue passionately before the court, poring through countless legal texts to find ways to absolve her of guilt. Even my own son Lucius had taken to defending her against me. "Sister Valentina is innocent," he had declared with the stubborn righteousness that marked him as his father's son. "Mother, you mustn't speak of her that way." My child possessed the same singular focus as Augustus. Beyond matters of state and family honor, his eyes held room only for that one person. When I realized this truth, I knew it was time to request my departure from their lives. The day before I left, my maid Margaret brought young Lucius to see me one final time. But when the boy caught sight of me, he immediately turned to hurry away. "Maggie, I promised Sister Valentina we'd fly kites together," he said, his voice edged with impatience. "We're going to be late." The distaste on his face was unmistakable. He feared I might prevent him from going. I managed to smile despite the ache in my chest. "Run along then," I told him gently. "Your mother won't stand in your way anymore." After leaving the Chancellor's estate, I returned to a small, dilapidated courtyard near the city gates, the modest dwelling my parents had left me. I took none of the gold or silver trinkets the servants had packed for me. I had entered the Chancellor's household with nothing, and it seemed fitting that I should leave the same way. When my parents died, I had been utterly alone. Following my period of mourning, I honored the marriage contract they had arranged and wed Augustus. He was completely devoted to his political career, rising steadily through the ranks until he achieved the position of Chancellor, leaving little time for domestic concerns. I had made it my purpose to attend to his daily needs, serve his parents with filial devotion, care for our child, and manage every detail of household affairs. For 8 years, I maintained perfect order in our home. Though he never showed me warmth or affection, I harbored no resentment. I simply accepted that he was a man of cold disposition and felt grateful that he had given me a place to belong. My only regret was that I could not accept the presence of another woman in what I had considered our sanctuary. I spent half a day cleaning the small courtyard, though much remained in need of repair, work that would have to wait until I could earn enough money. After wandering the streets for some time, I finally found a means of supporting myself: embroidery work. I arranged the garments and thread I had collected from various shops on my stone table, working quickly in the remaining daylight. I could not afford candles, let alone lamp oil. Gradually, over the course of 6 months, I managed to save enough to make life less precarious. One afternoon, as I sat in the courtyard embroidering handkerchiefs, hurried footsteps approached my gate. "Aunt Evelina, look what I caught!" called a young voice. The visitor was a small boy, not tall but radiating confidence and spirit. This was Dorian, who lived in the courtyard next to mine. An orphan, he had been raised by his grandfather until the old man's death 2 years prior, after which he had lived alone, surviving on street charity and foraging for fruit and wild vegetables beyond the city walls. During my first difficult days, when I often went hungry, Dorian had noticed my plight and generously shared his meager findings with me. Later, I taught him to use a bow and arrow, and he began hunting small game. Today, he carried a plump wild fowl, his youthful face bright with unguarded joy. I smiled approvingly. "We'll feast well tonight." Pleased with my praise, Dorian set down his bow and began preparing the bird in the corner of the courtyard. Though only 8 years old, he possessed remarkable intelligence and learned quickly from my instruction. That evening, we enjoyed our first substantial meal in days. "Mother, I'll take these sashes to the shop," Dorian announced, gathering the embroidered items I had completed into a basket. I reminded him to walk carefully and not rush, though he agreed readily while already heading for the gate at a quick pace. I shook my head in fond exasperation. A year earlier, I had formally adopted Dorian as my son, giving him the name Dorian Evelington after my own family. I taught him to read and write, found him an instructor in martial arts and archery, and from that time forward, we depended upon each other completely. When half an hour passed without Dorian's return, I began to worry. Just as I was preparing to search for him, our neighbor rushed to my gate in distress. "Sister Evelina, you must come quickly," she called. "Dorian is fighting with someone at the bookstore. He's angered some important people." I dropped my needlework immediately and hurried toward the shop. When I arrived at the bookstore, I found chaos inside. Books scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. In one corner, Dorian stood with injuries on his face, glaring with fierce determination at a well-dressed boy of similar age. Both children bore the marks of their conflict. The expensively clothed youth noticed my arrival and fell silent, then turned away with obvious pride and resentment. "You left us," he said coldly. "I don't need your concern." I ignored him entirely, my gaze passing over him with indifference as I hurried to Dorian's side. "Are you badly hurt anywhere?" I asked, my voice gentle with worry. My tender attention toward Dorian seemed to infuriate the other boy completely. "I'm your real son," he burst out. "This bastard child injured me, and still you show him concern?" Indeed, this angry youth was none other than my biological son, Lucius. I turned to face him with a stern expression, my brow creased in disapproval. "Control your tongue," I said sharply. "Is this how the Chancellor's household has taught you to speak?" "He's cursed with misfortune," Lucius continued, his voice rising. "His parents and relatives all died because of his evil influence. Why do you still protect him?" As Lucius's anger reached fever pitch, I spoke with calm authority. "Dorian is my son, and he has a mother who loves him." My words hung in the air as a shadow fell across the shop entrance. I turned to see Augustus, whom I had not encountered in 2 years. The man before me remained as striking as ever, features like artwork, his bearing noble as jade, his black brocade robe speaking of undeniable authority. The coldness in his expression made others hesitate to meet his gaze directly. Despite myself, I recalled our first meeting all those years ago. Back then, my mourning period had just ended, and my uncle was eager to be rid of his burden by seeing me married quickly. After my parents' deaths, the family's former glory had faded, leaving my uncle in such desperate circumstances that he had even hinted to the Chancellor's family that he would accept any arrangement, even if I were to become a mere concubine. After all, my betrothal to Augustus had been only a verbal agreement between our families. At that time, I existed in a haze of grief and resignation, bound by filial duty to accept whatever fate others chose for me. I had resolved that if I were to suffer the humiliation of becoming a concubine, I would take my own life rather than disgrace my deceased parents' memory. But to everyone's surprise, Augustus publicly announced his intention to take me as his principal wife. Amazed, I looked up and saw him clearly for the first time, the same cold, controlled features that seemed to hold no unnecessary emotion. Before leaving the estate that day, I had approached him to ask why he would marry me. His reply was matter of fact. "I could see in your eyes that you would choose death over dishonor." I was startled to realize that my inner thoughts had been so transparent. He continued, "Besides, the Chancellor's family has no tradition of keeping concubines. Since I must eventually marry, your steady temperament makes you suitable for the role." His words were purely practical, devoid of any romantic sentiment. Though his gaze held no trace of love, somehow it was enough to capture my heart completely. Those 8 years of marriage had not been entirely without harmony. There was a time when Augustus's career had stalled. His rigid principles and refusal to align with any particular prince had left him politically isolated and frustrated. During those months when he remained at home, I had carefully tended to his moods and worked to ease his melancholy. Gradually, he had begun to open his heart to me. Though he never learned to be tender in the conventional way, he did show me a kind of restrained affection, treating me as more than a mere household convenience. Later, when the new emperor ascended the throne, Augustus finally received the recognition he deserved and threw himself back into his demanding work. I had grown accustomed to his emotional distance and professional preoccupations. But then came the day when Valentina entered our lives, and I witnessed a side of Augustus I had never known existed. Now, in the bookstore's upper room, Augustus and I sat at a table by the window while Dorian and Lucius maintained their hostile standoff from nearby chairs, neither boy willing to concede defeat. The fight had begun when Lucius deliberately knocked into Dorian, causing his books to scatter, then trampled on them mockingly. When Dorian demanded an apology, Lucius had sneered and refused, leading Dorian to strike him in anger. I had once loved Lucius with genuine maternal devotion. I had supervised his education, played with him, taken him fishing at our country estate. Though he possessed some of his father's natural coldness toward me, I had poured nearly all my affection into raising him. But everything changed after Valentina's arrival. He began to show open contempt for me, resenting my supervision of his studies and defying my attempts to prevent his unauthorized outings with her. His accusations still echoed in my memory. "You only try to control me. You don't deserve to be my mother. I want Sister Valentina to be my mother instead." Recalling those painful words, I withdrew my attention and met Augustus's gaze directly. "What is it you wish to discuss?" I asked. Augustus had insisted we sit and talk before departing, which was why we now found ourselves in this upper room. I could feel his penetrating stare as he studied me. After a long pause, he spoke with characteristic restraint. "When will you return home?" His question baffled me. Why would I return? His frown deepened with obvious irritation. "You've been carrying on this charade for 2 years now. Haven't you made your point sufficiently?" I stared at him in genuine amazement. The absurdity of his assumption actually made me laugh. Augustus apparently believed that our divorce had been nothing more than an elaborate tantrum on my part. Seeing my amusement seemed to soften his expression slightly, though his next words immediately restored the ice in his demeanor. "Surely the Chancellor's mental faculties remain intact. Have you forgotten that we are legally divorced?" I took Dorian to the medicine shop across from the bookstore to tend to his injuries. Seeing the cuts on his lips and cheeks made my heart ache terribly. I dabbed healing powder gently onto his wounds, working with the utmost care. Dorian seemed oblivious to any pain, his serious young eyes watching me intently before he asked in a small voice, "Are you angry with me, Mother?" "Angry about what? About your lack of self-care?" I blew softly on his injured cheek and continued applying medicine to his hands. Dorian spoke hesitantly. "I know he's your real son." My hands stilled as I looked directly into his earnest face. "Dorian, you are my only son." A sound behind us made me turn. Lucius stood in the doorway, his face pale as death, his eyes bright with unshed tears so like his father's. I ignored his stricken expression and continued treating Dorian's wounds. With my attention focused on him, Dorian finally allowed himself to wince from the pain, making me scold him gently. "Perhaps next time you'll think twice before fighting." As the son of a chancellor, Lucius naturally had servants at his disposal. Even with my confidence in Dorian's training, he could have been seriously outnumbered. His impulsive nature needed considerable improvement. I advised him that discretion was sometimes the better part of valor, and Dorian stuck out his tongue playfully before producing several books from inside his robes. He looked disappointed as he said, "I just couldn't let him dirty the books I bought for you, Mother." I ruffled his hair affectionately. "Anything my Dorian chooses for me is precious." As we prepared to leave, Lucius blocked our path. He clenched his small fists and stared at me intently. "I'm injured too." "The Chancellor's estate has physicians," I replied without meeting his wounded gaze. "Young Master Lucius can receive proper treatment at home." Taking Dorian's hand, I walked past him and out into the street. In our courtyard that evening, I was teaching Dorian to read when he grew restless and eager to practice his martial arts instead. "Mother, I plan to join the army someday and fight in battles," he declared. "Reading isn't that important. Knowing a few characters should be enough." I disagreed and tapped his fidgeting hands lightly with the book. "Even for military service, you must become a general with both courage and wisdom." What general doesn't understand military strategy? The battlefield involves more than swordplay. There are tactics to master and the nature of men to comprehend. All of this requires extensive reading and study. Besides, the military examinations test knowledge of strategic texts. Dorian nodded with sudden understanding, his expression becoming quite serious. "I understand, Mother. I'll study diligently and won't be just a common soldier." "Good," I said approvingly. "If you cannot recite the first 10 chapters of military strategy by tomorrow, you can forget about attending the Festival of Ingenious Skills." Dorian gave me a plaintive look, but seeing that I would not negotiate, he promised faithfully to complete the assignment. I smiled and patted his head in encouragement. At Dorian's age, most well-born children were already well-versed in classical military texts. Some would even qualify for the imperial examinations within a few years. Since he had spent his early childhood focused merely on survival, his education had been severely neglected. Now I could only push him to catch up as quickly as possible. He was a boy with genuine ambition. I could not bear to see his abilities limited by illiteracy. I was about to rise and prepare some food when I noticed Lucius standing silently in our doorway. He watched Dorian with an expression of complex emotions, but when he saw me looking at him, his small face crumpled into exaggerated misery. "Mother," he said pitifully, "I quarreled with Father and ran away from home. I have nowhere else to go. Please take me in." I walked to the gate and regarded his theatrical distress with complete indifference. "This place is far too small to accommodate so many people. Young Master Lucius should seek shelter elsewhere." With that, I closed the gate firmly. Lucius refused to leave. Eventually, he curled up right outside my door and fell asleep on the ground, clearly gambling that I would relent. But I remained unmoved by his performance. After several days of this behavior, my neighbors began asking why the Chancellor's son was sleeping rough outside my gate. The local residents knew only that I had divorced my husband. They had no idea I had once been married to the Chancellor himself. Finally, I felt compelled to speak with Lucius directly. "Young master," I said, "you yourself declared that I was unworthy to be your mother and that you wanted Miss Valentina to fill that role. What exactly is this display supposed to accomplish?" "Mother, I know I was wrong," he pleaded. "I was just a child speaking foolishly. Please forgive me." I would not. I had already forgiven him too many times. With a weary sigh, I said, "Return home. I am no longer your mother." On the evening of the Festival of Ingenious Skills, Dorian had finally mastered his military texts, so we went together to enjoy the celebrations. Among the bustling crowds around the riddle booths, I spotted a familiar figure I had not seen in some time. Valentina. I could not help but remember my first encounter with her. That day, Learning that Augustus had returned from court, I had prepared pear soup and brought it to his study as usual. Before I could enter, I heard the sound of breaking porcelain from within. Opening the door, I found Augustus standing behind his desk, his face dark with unusual fury. I had rarely seen him display such open anger. Since becoming chancellor, he had grown increasingly skilled at concealing his emotions, making his thoughts impossible to read. Assuming some crisis had developed along the borders, I was surprised to learn that his rage concerned a legal case instead. The recent examination fraud scandal had implicated numerous officials, including Minister of Rights Lord Aldrich, who faced execution for accepting bribes and leaking test questions. His entire family was sentenced to exile. As a scholar himself, Augustus despised corruption in the examination system above all other crimes. Yet somehow he was now defending Lord Aldrich passionately before the court. I was completely bewildered. The examination fraud has destroyed years of honest study for countless students, I said. Why would you speak in his defense? Court matters are beyond your understanding, he replied curtly, making it clear the conversation was over. Later, he brought home a young woman. Wife, he announced. This is Miss Valentina. She currently has no home, so please have the servants prepare suitable quarters for her. I recognized the somewhat disheveled but undeniably beautiful woman before me. She was Lord Aldrich's daughter. Only afterward did I learn from others that following Lord Aldrich's execution, Augustus had searched through countless legal precedents to save Valentina from exile, enduring accusations of favoritism and judicial misconduct in the process. Mother, both boys said simultaneously, bringing me back to the present moment. In the busy market square, Lucius's small figure stood between Valentina and Augustus, creating the picture of an intimate family of three. The riddle booth vendor, seeing potential customers, called out enthusiastically, "1 coin per riddle attempt. Solve it correctly, and the lantern is yours free. This lady just won a rabbit lantern." I followed the vendor's gesture toward Valentina, who indeed carried a decorative lantern. Dorian looked eager to try, so I gave him several coins. Unfortunately, despite multiple attempts, he failed to solve any of the puzzles. Lucius laughed scornfully and had his servant pay for attempts as well. But he fared no better, missing the correct answers 3 times running. When Valentina saw his embarrassment, she offered him her rabbit lantern as consolation. Normally, Lucius would have accepted such a gift happily, but today he glanced nervously in my direction first. I paid no attention to his hesitation and spoke to the disappointed Dorian. "Would you like a lantern?" "Mother will help you win one." I paid the vendor another coin and successfully solved the riddle. As Dorian excitedly reached for a small tiger lantern, Lucius pushed forward possessively and declared, "Mother, I want that monkey lantern." I glanced at him coolly and replied, "If young Master Lucius desires one, Miss Valentina can win another for you." Taking the tiger lantern, I handed it to Dorian. Lucius's expression completely crumbled, and he began creating a scene without regard for the surrounding crowd. "Mother, I'm your real son. You used to love me most of all." His public tantrum made me frown and look toward Augustus, but the man who normally insisted on proper behavior made no attempt to control his son, merely watching me in silence. Lucius continued his outburst. "I don't care. I want my mother. I want Mother to come home. I don't want Sister Valentina anymore. Mother, please come back." Valentina flushed with embarrassment as I took Dorian's hand and walked away, unwilling to engage in their family drama. Behind us, I heard Lucius angrily blaming her. "Father, it's all her fault. Mother is angry because you want to marry Sister Valentina. That's why Mother left us." Outrageous! Such wild accusations! Where do you hear these ridiculous stories? Augustus's voice grew faint as we departed. Back home, Dorian carefully examined his tiger lantern before placing it reverently in our cabinet. Noticing me studying a chess manual, he asked curiously, "Mother, do you know how to play chess? Could you teach me?" "Of course," I replied, setting aside the manual and bringing out a simple board to begin instruction. Later, Dorian gazed at me with admiration. "How amazing! Have you known how to play since childhood?" I smiled and shook my head. In truth, Augustus had taught me the game during the second year of our marriage, when our relationship was at its most harmonious. I was also carrying Lucius at that time. Indeed, we had not consummated our marriage during the first year. Initially, Augustus felt no attraction toward me. Later, his official duties frequently took him away from the capital. Only when he was temporarily without posting did our relationship begin to develop. I still remembered our delayed wedding night when he held me close, gently kissing my forehead. Though he spoke few words of affection, I saw unmistakable tenderness in his eyes. It was that single glimpse of love that sustained me through all the subsequent years of coldness. He had taught me chess during my pregnancy to help pass the time. I invariably lost to him. Though my frustration grew, I felt too shy to admit my feelings or ask him to let me win occasionally. A man of his rigid principles would never deliberately lose to humor me. Perhaps pregnancy made my emotions more volatile because after yet another defeat, I announced petulantly that I would never play again, my eyes threatening tears. To my amazement, he insisted on one more game. This time he lost. He maintained his composed expression while calmly acknowledging defeat. For someone whose respect for rules superseded everything else to make such an exception for my sake, in that moment, I believed I truly was special to him. I had thought then that he returned my feelings in his own way. Only after Valentina's arrival did I learn the true extent of what Augustus was capable of doing for someone he cared about. Before sleep, Dorian regarded me with obvious hesitation before finally speaking. "Mother, was it really because of that woman that you divorced the Chancellor?" I shook my head. Strictly speaking, it was because of Augustus and Lucius. After Augustus brought Valentina into our household, the servants whispered among themselves about whether the family might soon have a new concubine. But Augustus never made any such announcement. The general public also speculated endlessly about the matter. No one had expected the cold chancellor to risk his reputation for a woman's sake. I tried to ignore the gossip, but the events unfolding before my eyes could not be dismissed. Since Valentina's arrival, Lucius had grown increasingly rebellious against my authority, and she frequently encouraged his truancy. When his tutor came to complain, I discovered that my son had missed nearly a month of lessons. While I understood that children naturally preferred play to study, allowing such behavior would ruin his education entirely. I made the same arrangement I always had. If he would attend his lessons properly, I would take him to our country estate when they concluded. He had always loved those excursions in the past. But this time, Lucius responded with words that cut straight to my heart. "I don't want to. Children should play freely. I want to fly kites with Sister Valentina and visit the hot springs with her." Valentina appeared at just the right moment to support him. "Madam, Lucius is only 6 years old. Why must you always constrain him so severely?" Unwilling to argue with her, I addressed my son directly. "Mother isn't forbidding you to play, but your studies cannot be neglected." I knew that even if he remained completely illiterate, his father's position would ensure a comfortable life. But the social expectations for children of our class were unforgiving. Other boys his age were already well read in classical texts and would qualify for imperial examinations within a few years. Moreover, Lucius had previously shown genuine interest in matters of governance and state, once declaring ambitiously that he would follow his father's example by achieving the highest examination honors and becoming a virtuous official serving the people. I tried reasoning with him. Have you forgotten your dream of emulating your father? Constant play will never make you a top scholar. I'm father's son. I don't need to work hard to learn things, just like Sister Valentina, he retorted. She's the most celebrated, talented woman in the capital, and her abilities are natural gifts, not the result of grinding study. We're born intelligent. You simply don't understand, Mother. His words infuriated me, and Valentina once again interjected. Actually, given Lucius's family background, there's no need to obsess over the examinations. Whether he achieves top honors won't affect his status, and besides, scholarly pursuits aren't the only path to success. Even if Valentina meant no harm, hearing such dismissive comments about the examination system from someone whose father had corrupted it so thoroughly struck me as deeply inappropriate. Miss Valentina is hardly qualified to discuss the importance of scholarly examinations, I said coldly. Her father's fraud had destroyed decades of honest study for countless young men. Valentina understood my meaning immediately, her face going pale. She bit her lip in apparent contrition. I know my position as a criminal's daughter makes me unworthy to offer opinions. I was only concerned that Lucius works too hard at his studies. Before I could respond, Lucius stepped protectively in front of her. Sister Valentina is innocent. I forbid you to speak to her that way, Mother. I hate how you always try to control me. I hate you. After that confrontation, even the servants noticed my dejection. Lucius spent every day in Valentina's company, and they were rarely to be found at home. When our paths did cross, he regarded me with open hostility. Augustus remained absent on official business. I longed to ask Augustus directly about his intentions regarding Valentina. If he truly planned to bring her formally into the family, I wanted to know so I could prepare for my displacement. But after installing her in our home, Augustus had thrown himself into his work and virtually disappeared. When he finally returned to the estate, I could no longer contain my questions about the situation. Regarding Miss Valentina, concern yourself with your own affairs, he interrupted coldly. Everything else is beyond your responsibility. His eyes held the same distant detachment I had seen at our first meeting. In that instant, I felt as though I had awakened from a long dream. Finally, I made the decision that would change every divorce. Following the Lantern Festival, Lucius began appearing frequently wherever Dorian and I spent time together. He witnessed every aspect of our daily interactions. When Dorian misbehaved, I would use a ruler to discipline his hands. When he returned from hunting with injuries, I would anxiously tend his wounds. If his tutor reported him dozing during lessons, I would make him stand in the corner as punishment. I took him fishing in the countryside and sewed his clothes with my own hands. Everything he observed filled Lucius with jealousy and resentment toward Dorian. Finally, he broke down and threw himself at my feet, weeping. "Mother, I truly know I was wrong," he sobbed. "You can discipline me however you want from now on. Please hit my hands with the ruler or make me stand in the corner like you do with him. Anything you want. Just treat me the way you treat him." I gently but firmly pushed him away. "Young master, return home. This is not where you belong." I recognized that his remorse stemmed only from witnessing my affection for Dorian. It was mere childish jealousy, not genuine repentance. I never expected Augustus to seek me out personally. He stood outside my gate, his distinguished bearing drawing curious stares from the neighbors. I had no choice but to invite him inside. He sat across from me in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried unusual gentleness. There has never been anything improper between Miss Valentina and myself. His declaration surprised me, though it stirred little emotion. His relationship with Valentina, whatever its nature, was no longer my concern. My indifference seemed to disturb him greatly. "You don't believe me? Do you share the same misconceptions as everyone else about Miss Valentina and me? For the first time, I saw confusion and regret in his typically controlled expression. He continued, "Was Valentina truly the reason you insisted on divorce?" I shook my head and met his questioning gaze directly. "It was your coldness that made me surrender any hope. I simply refused to continue making myself into a laughingstock." Augustus looked stunned. He began explaining himself with uncharacteristic urgency. "These past 2 years, I've been almost entirely in the South, investigating corruption cases that reached so high into government that His Majesty trusted no one else with the task. I had to depart immediately when I agreed to the divorce. There was no time for proper discussion. I never truly wanted to end our marriage." His usually measured voice carried obvious anxiety. I smiled ruefully. "Lord Augustus, this is the first time you have ever shared details of your work with me. In the past, you never informed me of your whereabouts or plans." His face went rigid with recognition. Those years of deliberate emotional distance could not be erased by a few words of explanation. I rose to escort him out. Augustus's upbringing prevented him from forcing his presence where unwelcome, though he lingered as long as courtesy allowed. He studied me with complex emotions and one final, hopeful plea. "I've had Valentina sent away. She will never reappear in our lives. I helped her only out of gratitude to her father, who once protected me when I faced false accusations from the former crown prince." "There's no need to explain," I interrupted him firmly. For the woman I had become, such clarifications no longer mattered. His upright frame seemed to sway slightly before he finally departed. Given Augustus's proud nature, I assumed that after my blunt rejection he would never again appear before me. But to my amazement, he waited outside my gate the very next morning and continued this pattern for several days running. He brought various delicacies with him. "I remember how much you enjoyed Master Chen's steamed buns," he would say. Indeed, I had once been fond of Master Chen's cooking, but that was long ago. I walked past him without acknowledgement, taking Dorian to a street vendor's stall instead. "Uncle Silas, 2 bowls of soup dumplings with extra spice, please," Dorian called familiarly to the elderly proprietor. "Coming right up," Uncle Silas replied, dropping fresh dumplings into his pot. After we finished our meal and I delivered Dorian to his martial arts instructor, I stopped to purchase thread and needles. Augustus intercepted my path home. "You don't need to live so difficultly," he said. "Even after our divorce, I should provide for your welfare." I stepped backward. "This life isn't difficult at all. I've been truly happy since leaving the Chancellor's estate." My expression held no trace of pretense, only the relaxation that comes with genuine freedom. Finally, I don't have to walk on eggshells wondering what someone else is thinking or try to win anyone's approval. This is the most peaceful I've felt since my parents died. Augustus seemed unable to accept this revelation. My words completely negated the 8 years of our marriage. His eyes suddenly blazed with hurt and anger. "How can you say such things?" he demanded. "I'm telling you the truth." Augustus refused to accept my testimony. He seemed convinced that I was retaliating for his past neglect and emotional unavailability. I felt no obligation to convince him otherwise. His interpretation of my motives was no longer my concern. After that tense confrontation, Augustus continued following me as though nothing had happened. Eventually, when people began recognizing his identity, rumors about my situation started circulating. Since I had lived such a sheltered life during my marriage, few had ever seen the Chancellor's wife clearly enough to identify me now. Most assumed that the Chancellor had developed some romantic interest in me rather than recognizing our shared past. Augustus seemed deliberately to abandon any attempt at discretion, constantly having gifts delivered to my small courtyard. Though I never accepted these offerings, he persisted with apparent satisfaction. Finally, I reached the end of my patience. Augustus, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? I only wish to make amends, he replied, his eyes reflecting an unusual vulnerability. The once pristine nobleman seemed diminished somehow, almost desperate. I remained unmoved by his apparent suffering. If you truly want to atone for the past, then never appear before me again. Stop interfering with the happiness I've finally found. I beg you, Augustus, for the sake of 8 years of faithful service to your household, please leave me in peace. My plea struck Augustus like a physical blow. His legendary self-control shattered as he gripped my shoulders urgently. Why must it be this way? He cried. I've sent Valentina away permanently. I promise never to neglect you again. Why can't we return to what we once had? Why? For a moment, the wild desperation in his eyes made me freeze. This was not the man I knew, but I quickly recovered and forced myself free of his grasp. Because I no longer love you, I told him clearly. I feel nothing for you anymore. Augustus seemed to collapse inwardly, all strength draining from his frame. After a long silence, he whispered hoarsely, "If that is truly what you want, then I accept it." With the military examinations approaching, I found myself more nervous than Dorian. I checked and rechecked his supplies and provisions obsessively, examining everything multiple times each day. Dorian watched my anxiety with amusement. Mother, don't worry so much. I know all the military texts by heart, and my credentials are properly prepared. He helped me to a chair and poured tea to calm my nerves. I knew my behavior was excessive, but couldn't help myself until I managed to sip the tea and regain some composure. Just then, a shadow fell across our open doorway. It was Lucius. I had not seen him in many months, nor Augustus either. Since that final confrontation, Augustus had kept his word and vanished completely from my life. The young man at my gate looked up when he noticed my attention, quickly wiping tears from his eyes before speaking in a voice thick with emotion. Mother, I've also registered for this year's examinations. I want to try my chances. I remained silent, offering neither concern nor encouragement. He opened his mouth as if to say more, but managed only a simple phrase, "I'm sorry, Mother." He understood that my maternal love was no longer available to him. Dorian achieved the highest honors in the military examinations, becoming the new champion of martial arts. He rode home in triumph, drums and gongs announcing his success, and personally helped me into the ceremonial carriage. Mother, His Majesty has granted us an estate befitting my new rank, he announced joyfully. Finally, I can provide you with the comfortable life you deserve. Tears filled my eyes as I touched his head affectionately, just as I had when he was small, my good son. I failed to notice another youthful face in the crowd, streaked with tears of his own. Lucius had not performed well in this round of examinations. Though his age would permit him to try again, other boys from prominent families had achieved distinction while he alone had failed. I knew people whispered behind his back, calling him worthless, the son of a brilliant, scholarly chancellor who could neither excel in civil nor military pursuits. During the 2 years since my departure, he had indeed neglected his studies severely. He wiped away his tears determinedly and walked toward the chancellor's estate, resolved to apply himself to learning with unprecedented dedication. When he finally achieved the highest honors, perhaps his mother would find it in her heart to forgive him. Dorian eventually became a renowned general of great distinction. He earned fame early through numerous battlefield victories and was eventually granted the title of General Protector of the North. Everyone knew that this accomplished general was exceptionally devoted to his mother, requesting no other reward for his military achievements except official recognition of my status. Without my mother's guidance, this humble servant might have frozen to death in some winter past, or at best become a street ruffian, he declared before the imperial court. She gave me the education and values that enable me to serve your majesty's cause. The general's words quickly spread throughout the capital, and people praised my success in raising such an exemplary son. His Majesty even issued a special edict commending my maternal virtues. During the emperor's birthday celebration, I received an invitation to the palace. Dressed in formal court attire, I sat beside Dorian at the imperial banquet. Across from us sat Chancellor Augustus. I had not seen him in years. He appeared much more careworn, bearing little resemblance to his former proud bearing. I had heard whispers that the Chancellor had grown increasingly ruthless and uncompromising in recent years, making many powerful enemies. The once cool gentleman had transformed into a harsh and calculating politician. Few people bothered to recall my former connection to him anymore. Beside Augustus sat Lucius, now grown into a young man, though his demeanor remained listless and defeated. Perhaps his repeated failures in the examinations had crushed the natural confidence expected of someone his age. But none of this concerned me any longer. I turned my attention back to Dorian as he presented me with exotic nuts he had acquired. Still maintaining the enthusiasm of his youth, he whispered conspiratorially, "Mother, people in the western regions claim these nuts promote longevity. You should eat plenty of them." I couldn't help but smile. "Very well, I'll eat as many as you wish." Indeed, I hoped for a long life. I wanted many more decades to spend with my devoted son. Epilogue of Augustus. After leaving the imperial palace, Augustus shut himself in his study. He had finally seen Evelina again in an official capacity after all these years. Though he maintained careful surveillance of her activities through trusted agents, he had not dared appear before her personally since their last encounter. Her final words to him remained like a blade through his heart, causing him to wake in agony from dreams of better times. How had they reached such a devastating conclusion? When had everything gone so terribly wrong? He remembered intending to refuse their family's ancient betrothal agreement when he first met Evelina, but seeing the deathly resignation in her eyes had somehow compelled him to honor the commitment. Their early married life seemed little different from his previous solitary existence, until those months when political setbacks forced him to remain at home. Only then did he truly observe the woman who had become his wife. From childhood, his mind had been consumed with matters of state and governance. Romantic entanglements had always seemed like pointless complications. The subtle emotions Evelina stirred in him, he had dismissed as natural consequence of their formal relationship. After all, she was his lawfully wedded wife. Feeling some special regard for her was only appropriate. He completely failed to recognize the tenderness in his own eyes when he looked at her, or to acknowledge how thoroughly he had come to depend on her presence. When they conceived their child, he could sense Evelina's growing attachment to him and the deepening love in her gaze. He assumed their lives would continue in this comfortable pattern indefinitely. But everything changed when he brought Valentina into their household. From that moment, Evelina began withdrawing from him emotionally. Valentina's father had once protected Augustus when he faced false accusations from a rival prince. He owed the man a considerable debt. When Lord Aldrich's life could not be saved, Augustus felt obligated to preserve his daughter from exile. Bringing her to the Chancellor's estate had been a matter of practical expedience. Such a large household could easily accommodate one more resident in some unused quarter. That was the extent of his consideration. When the corruption investigation in the South demanded his immediate attention, he barely had time to think of domestic arrangements. Hearing that Evelina seemed distressed and losing weight over their son's behavior, he had curtly advised her to focus on her own health rather than worry about disciplinary matters. He never imagined that their next meeting would involve divorce papers. Augustus still recalled his fury upon seeing those documents. But the emperor's urgent summons meant immediate departure for the south, and the investigation carried deadly risks. Many officials might not survive the political purge that would follow. Divorce might actually protect Evelina from potential consequences. So he had agreed temporarily, planning to address the situation properly upon his return. He had no time to consider why Evelina might suddenly want to dissolve their marriage, and when he finally came home, everything had changed beyond repair. From Lucius's tearful accusations, he belatedly realized that Evelina's decision had been motivated by jealousy over Valentina. In truth, he had nearly forgotten the woman's existence. When she occasionally appeared in his presence, he had assumed she was some servant attending to Lucius. Understanding the cause of Evelina's anger brought unexpected relief, even joy. She must care for him deeply to feel such possessive jealousy. Removing the source of her displeasure seemed simple enough. He had Valentina sent away immediately to a remote frontier town, far enough that Evelina would never encounter her again. But when they finally spoke face to face, Evelina's words shattered his heart completely. The problem had never been Valentina at all. It was his own emotional neglect and coldness that had driven away the woman he loved. Suddenly, he found himself reliving years of deliberate distance, moments when he had seen Evelina's uncertainty and anxiety but chose to ignore them rather than offer reassurance or explanation. He had assumed that explicit emotional communication was unnecessary between married couples, not realizing how his silence had tormented her. Only then did he finally admit to himself the truth he had denied for so long. He had fallen irrevocably in love with Evelina years ago, but had been too proud and rigid to acknowledge such feelings. For someone of his character, admitting to romantic love felt like a weakness, a distraction from the serious business of governance and duty. So he had suppressed and denied his emotions, never realizing that this denial would cost him the most precious thing in his life. Now it was too late for regrets. The only thing left was to ensure Evelina's happiness from afar, to spend whatever remained of his life protecting the contentment he had been too foolish to cherish when it was within his reach.